Good afternoon and welcome everybody to Datum's webinar on the impact of the COVID-19 virus on the temporary agency worker landscape. What we've tried to do here today for everyone who's with us is that we put together a panel of 5 speakers, each of which are hopefully going to stay within 10 minutes and talk about their various different areas of expertise, and there's a bit of crossover, but they all have their areas, their points of difference. So we're going to do that. So 10 minutes each, and then at the end we're going to try and answer any questions. So if anybody on the webinar has questions, please feel free to throw them through on the chat screen, and Karina, who's coordinating this, will pick them up and then she'll forward them on to us, and we can try and answer all the questions at the end. So it's a tight schedule. I'd love to hang around and wait for everybody to join, but I'm just going to crack on. And what I'll do is just go through each person individually and talk a little bit about them. And then when they come on, they can give you a bit more detail if they want to. So first of all, myself, I'm Jared Mollison. I'm the sales director for Datum. I've been in the industry, good and bad, man and boy, for over 23 years. For the last 15 years, I've been selling managed services predominantly into the temporary and contractor market across a number of different industry sectors. Then we've got with us Gary Saville. Gary is the Managing Director for Staffline Specialist Services Division, of which Datum is one of, but he also runs or is Managing Director for Staffline's driving division, and it's that today that he's here to talk about, because they've been quite heavily impacted by what's happened. Next, we've got Tim Southern. He's the Regional Managing Director for Staffline, and his area of expertise covers food, aviation, e-commerce, fashion, automotive, and he can give quite a broad spectrum of experience from what he's found over the past 10 weeks or so. Then we've got Laura Savage. Laura is the Market Innovation Director for People Plus, who are one of the UK's leading employment support and training companies. Laura's been heavily involved in the Feed the Nation campaign, which has got a lot of coverage on the national press, so some of you may have seen it, and Laura's going to talk to you a bit more about that and how they've managed to shift people from some of the industries that have been most heavily affected into those that are desperate for staff. Then last but not least, we've got Belinda Johnson. Belinda is the CEO of WorkLab. WorkLab are an employment research consultancy. They do work for a lot of the UK's largest recruitment companies, and she also does a lot of reports for some of the recruitment governing bodies. And she's very well placed to talk about where we are now, but also where we're going in the future, and what her, I'll be interested to know what her view of the future looks like. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a bit of background about Datum as a business and why we're doing this. So our business, we're not a recruitment agency, but we manage around about 140 million of agency spend across our different clients. We're experts in managing the supply chain of recruitment agencies into those clients, and the split in our business is 60-40 blue collar versus white. So my next slide is really about how we've been impacted by the lockdown, essentially. So since Boris made his announcement on the 23rd of March, pretty much overnight we lost 70% of our income from one day to the next. So we've been impacted. We've taken advantage of the government's furlough scheme. We furloughed a number of our staff that would have been twiddling their fingers, and we've also gone to a 4-day week for a number of people, myself included. So today's my Friday, so that's a positive. If we look in general about how the rest of the market has been impacted, there's not really a sector that hasn't had some sort of impact, most of them negative. And the graph there shows from top to bottom, the difference in impact. What that means at the moment, the latest figures are that over a quarter of the UK's workforce are currently on furlough. So the figures came out yesterday, 8.4 million jobs across 800,000 companies. It's quite significant. And in the news this morning, we heard about EasyJet making redundancies. They're making 30% of their staff redundant. And from market research, out of the survey, 50% of people believe that they'll either be furloughed, made redundant, or asked to take a pay cut in the next 3 months. So the effects of this are quite significant. They're going to be with us for a while. But looking at PwC's estimates for GDP growth, they believe that we'll be in the range of -7 to -13 this year. But the good news, and there is some good news, is that next year it will start to pick up again, and that they think we'll end the year somewhere between -1.5 and -7. So not quite back to where we were pre-COVID, but almost there. And I think most of us would take that the way things are at the moment. Age also has an impact on the numbers of individuals who are currently furloughed. So the highest impacted age group is 18 to 24. So a quarter of that age group have been furloughed. And the reason behind that is not because of their age, it's because they tend to work in the bars, the restaurants, the pubs, and high street stores. And they're the ones clearly who've been most impacted by where we are at the moment. If you're still fortunate enough to be in the 35 to 44 age category, then you are least likely to have been furloughed. So only 15% of you have experienced that. I just wanted to look at some of the biggest trends. So first one, clearly there's a big reduction in the overall demand for staff. So for the first time since the global financial crisis in 2009, there was a reduction in demand for both permanent and temporary workers. Permanent staff, the demand for permanent staff fell at a higher rate than temporary, as you can imagine. Second trend, so key industries are reporting higher demand. So healthcare, big demand for nursing and medical staff. Supply chain, logistics, big increases there of around about 7%. And I know Gary will go into some information about that. Also hardware and networking. So as there was the drive to get people working from home, there was a big shift to these networking businesses that help people get set up for a new way of working. Third trend, the big differences across occupations. So supermarkets are hiring like Billy-O, but that's been offset by the fact that high street retailers have absolutely been devastated. And there's also been a reduction in the need for sales and customer services, software programmers, developers, chefs, catering roles, big reductions. Final trend, there are differences across the regions. So Scotland and Northern Ireland reported the biggest falls in the demand. London has been less affected because of the high proportion of professional services type workers, and the lockdown, unsurprisingly, has had a bigger impact in the regions where there's a heavy concentration of heavy industry and face-to-face industries. So just my final slide. I've no idea where I am for time, but just talk about what we found. So the trends within our clients, our facilities management clients, where we found that there's an element of cleaning in their client base, there was an initial increase in demand there. Some of the planned maintenance they had has been brought forwards, but now as that's been finished off, we've seen a reduction. So they're running at about 50% of the levels of demand that they had prior to the 23rd of March. House building, I think as I mentioned, that pretty much all the house builders shut down from the 23rd of March, and some of them the previous weeks as well. There is a return to work underway, but what they're telling us is that they're focusing on the units that they've already sold and that are sort of watertight, and then they need to think about the future in terms of the levels of demand and the units that they're going to produce from there onwards. Construction as a whole, 70% of 70% reduction, which ties in with the figures that we've seen. There's been a general shortage of materials. That's what essentially led to them shutting down, a lot of them shutting down. Shortage of staff from subcontractors. Trades, when they're returning, we've heard stories of them asking for, or being asked for, up to 30% reduction in their pay. And I saw in the press yesterday, I think it was, where Barratt had written a letter out to all of their subcontractors asking them to take a 15% reduction in their charge, and then quickly said, oh, it was a mistake. We forgot to, we shouldn't have sent that out. There are regional differences in construction. So some of the worst hit areas are Yorkshire and Humber. They're down 32%, South West down 27%, and Wales down 25%. And then my final point, within care, we operate predominantly within care homes. And what we saw is that there's been an increase initially where there are people who are isolating and they've been backfilled with agency workers, but they seem to have leveled out and got more to a normal level from now onwards. So that's my last slide. What I'm going to do now is pass you on to Gary, but I've got a few questions to ask Gary. So Gary, can you give us a bit of information about your driving division, numbers of drivers, and the types of clients you work for? You need to unmute. There you go.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Just repeat your question, Jared. Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, sorry. Just tell us about your driving business and who are your clients and what sort of numbers of workers have you got working with you?
I'll give you a brief summary of Staffline's driving division. Essentially, our focus as a business is on-site, higher volume clients. So the business essentially doesn't look after what we would call range-based businesses, which was 2s and 3s, holiday cover, stick cover, etc. We work very much strategically on a national basis with approximately 70 on-site locations, up to about 120 million spend last year. Primarily our customers are food retailers such as Tesco's, Waitrose, Sainsbury's, but also heavily inbound with the likes of John Lewis, Argos, 3PLs, the XPO, and we also work sort of quite in depth with the automotive industry, Nissan, Jaguar, Land Rover, BMW, and Aston Martin. So there's some fairly good brands in there, but as you'll sort of no doubt see, that they're pretty over a number of sectors that have been impacted indifferently.
So what sectors have had the biggest drop off, and without asking the obvious, what has had the biggest increase?
Well, you can imagine food retail had a significant spike, which represented quarter 4 volumes, which is obviously the traditional Christmas peak. We saw extremely volatile requirements across multiple of food retailers and also the supply chain into food retailers. But countering that, we also saw dramatic reductions across the automotive, retail, fashion retail industries that really drove sort of from a driver aspect, it gave us the ability to fulfill and populate our clients' requests in the food retail community and that flexibility, but also gave us quite an excessive pool of drivers available, but also impacted our teams that are managing across the country in those sectors that were negatively affected by it. So I think to put it into context, it probably impacted the business at about 50%. We normally in normal trading about 2,500 drivers out working a day, 3,000 in peak. we were very much in the region around 1,200 to 1,300 drivers over the last 6 to 8 weeks on a daily basis. Probably 80% of them were representing the food retail sector.
Yeah. What we talked earlier about furlough, what about the drivers that have not been able to work? Have they taken advantage of the furlough scheme?
Well, it's quite difficult within driving because probably 80% of the community are self-employed on limited company status. So it's obviously the majority of those drivers from our research and the drivers that's worked for us that unfortunately we've not been able to place in work that were either heavily embalmed within the automotive industry or fashion retail. They've sort of, from a tax perspective, not been able to enjoy the furlough, and they've really been trying to, keep themselves busy with part-time work and just trying to get through this period and pay the mortgage. It's been an extremely challenging period overall, really, especially within the automotive sector in the sort of Birmingham Solihull areas, which Jaguar Land Rover is so prominent. It's obviously, it's not just from a driver perspective, from a driving division, it's also our teams management, and we pretty much an even split at running at 50% of the business, but also 50% of our operating team have also had to be furloughed.
Right, yeah. So obviously there's a lot more encouraging news about some of the high street stores opening up over the coming weeks. How do you see that playing out, and how do you see the demand and your business getting back to some sort of business as normal?
It's a real difficult one. I think automotive will be a far longer process. I wouldn't expect to get anywhere near February, March trading numbers this year. I think at the very best, potentially 60-70% towards the latter end of the year. It'll be very much a phased approach. I think retail is an interesting one. We actually work very closely with a number of fashion retailers, and it's been a very difficult situation to call, because the majority of those retailers actually trade and deliver their product via a 3PL. So we are obviously discussing with a 3PL in terms of volumes and what that looks like week 1, week 2. What does it look like 6 weeks down the line? Because the majority of these drivers aren't furloughed, so we need to start preparing and planning in order to deliver on those clients' needs. And it's been a constantly moving feed. So for me to say we are safely working to a clear forecast and understanding is simply not the case. I think time will tell. Obviously, they're all getting geared up to return back on the 15th. We are starting to see a little bit of movement around stock rotation, because obviously back in the lockdown, it was a very different climate. So we are seeing elements of movement, but at this moment in time, the forecasting or the expectation is it's not going to be straight back to BAU by any means. No. Very much a phased approach, and obviously the customers, especially in these most affected sectors, have had their own workers, so we say furloughed and stood down as from a temporary labour supplier. We are going to be the latter end of that when those volumes change and they actually require our services again, as call will be the first port of call. So it's a very difficult one to give a clear directive of how we see it going. All we can do at this moment in time is prepare the best way we can, maximise the availability across a 24/7 shift pattern, and wait for further clarity from clients and cast iron requirements going into sort of week after next.
Yeah. Do you not think, though, just final question, just because of time, that potentially it could be good for your business as companies realise that they sort of need that flexibility, and they may want to not necessarily rely too much on their permanent staff and have more flexible temporary workers. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I think traditionally, I mean, we've got to be realistic about the economy and where we are after, going through an experience that I think has been widely reported that we haven't been through since Second World War. And this is probably going to instigate far more challenging measures than a recession, potentially moving to depression. So how we react to that, we have always, so we say, prospered in our requirements from clients in more difficult times, when clients have become slightly more concerned, extending their fixed cost base, because it normally comes down the chain of their customers that when we're in times when the economy is challenged, that it's very much a more volatile order process, and the requirements that we get requested from customers. And likewise, in some of the manufacturing industries, in more buoyant times, we take away the flexibility, and they enjoy having more the delivery and the service capacity to their customers by actually sort of carrying cost at times. So it takes away some of the volatility. However, I have no doubt what we're going to encompass when we get back to some kind of normality of trading, that there will be no cost carry whatsoever. Our customers will be managing commercials meticulously and maximise efficiencies to the nth degree. So I fully expect for the industry to potentially be a lot more tailored to their exact requirements, whether that be 3 days a week, 2 days a week, whether that be a night shift, whether that be centred around core rotas. If we're working a Sunday to Thursday, that we're getting spikes on Fridays, which we'd normally have a bit more of a spread, keep more capacity of pool, give more flexibility and guarantee to the customer. I really think it will be just purely an as and when, which then gives our teams that, a little bit more challenge to manage effectively and manage the labour pool accordingly, because ultimately it's that labour pool that is not getting an average week for a driver, 45 hours. We could be working on ratios of 32, 30 hours. So it's not then just a case of managing the driver pool and its regularity and its performance. It's also managing their expectation, because they've also got responsibilities that they need to pay for. So we'll be looking at like regional strategies where we've got, say, 3-4 clients within a 10-mile geographic that they may have to work, in order to get a full week, 2 days in one client, 1 day in another, and 2 days in another client. So
Gary, I'm gonna have to cut you short there because we're just running over on time. But thanks for that, and move on to Tim. Tim, you might need to unmute yourself. Still on mute. There we go. There we go.
Here we go. Sorry,
yeah, right. We can hear you. Tell me about your business and what sectors you look after and what's been the impact.
Yeah, so the business I look after, it kind of starts from sort of West Midlands, North Wales, drops down into Cornwall and then across to Kent, really. So it's a fair size region. What makes that up is about 20,000 workers, kind of busier times of the year. So it's a significant amount of workforce that we place out to work every day. Sectors I look after, everything from automotive, aviation, through to fashion, e-com of every industry, food logistics and food. So that pretty much covers West Midlands and the South. And I think, a lot of it should be said, similarly to Gary, you know, it's really it's blue collar workers, high volume, where we don't generally involved in ones and twos, but you know, the kind of 50, 100, 200, 300 workers in our worker pool is really where we focus.
Yeah. And what are the sectors that what are the really busy sectors that you're struggling to find candidates for at the moment?
I think the busy sectors, it makes no surprise to probably anybody on the call, really. I think if you look at the food and food logistics, without question, they've been the busier sectors over the last couple of months. Food logistics broadly were about 120, 125% of their expected volume for the period. Helped along by some good weather at the start of when sort of furlough first kicked in, when people were getting their barbecues out. So
Yeah.
a little bit. Food production as well. You know, more people buying more food from supermarkets. So yeah, there was significant demand in food and food logistics. And then randomly you start looking at the e-com fashion retailers. So you look at people like brand names like Boohoo, for example.
Yeah.
We deal with
They've just made an acquisition today, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. It's a business that grows, and it's growing very fast. So, and then they've got a number of different areas of their business already. But you know, if we take the Boohoo brand that targets 18 to 24, so I'm just outside their target audience, and you know, they've got. You mentioned earlier, Jared, that you know, where you look at the amount of 18 to 25s that were placed on furlough, we're still getting a regular income, probably.
Yeah.
Be not that much worse off than what they were with their travel costs getting into and from work. The good weather, wanting to look good for Snapchat or Instagram, or it is they use. So
yeah, that's me. I'm on it all the time.
Well, I was going to say, you know, because looking at our polo shirts, maybe
middle-aged blokes.
Yeah, maybe that's why we're target audience. So yes, I think. Positively impacted, yeah. You know, companies like that negatively impacted. You know, it goes without saying. You know, automotive. Gary's touched on aviation. I'll probably talk a bit more on they. You know, we have a large contract in Heathrow and Gatwick, putting all of the meals on the BA flights. Clearly, that dropped to nothing overnight.
Yeah.
You know, we've got a lot of long-term service employees, which, you know, I think the first thing to do was to look for them and make sure that furlough payments were readily available straight away. Noise within the recruitment industry where it was people being given it on a pay when paid basis from HMRC, which we fundamentally disagreed with. We needed to pay the workers in the week. So protecting the workers, protecting their income, and also protecting the skill set. But we don't know still quite when it's going to bounce back. But at that point, you really don't know how quick things are going to bounce back. So you've got to protect the skill and training that has gone into the workers in order to be able to make sure we can bring them back at the right time for the customers.
Yeah.
So yeah, certainly aviation has taken a huge knock, and I think I'm concerned actually. I'm sure Belinda has got far more statistics I have, and so I'm not quoting statistics. I think the something I've it's been widely I think talked about now is, you know, aviation getting back to about 70% of pre-COVID numbers by 2023, which is just staggering when you think about it.
Yeah. I heard that one as well.
And I mean, you then look at automotive, and you look at the automotive sector, and you think, well, you know, there are going to sites are opening up, but they're opening up with one shift or maybe two shifts. So the impact on that sector will be felt for a long time to come.
Got you. And what do you think the impact of the furlough changes, the changes in the distribution are going to have?
I think it's going to speed up people's decisions, to be honest. I think it's there's a lot of companies, like you said, a significant amount of people on furlough. And I think, you know, it's given, what it's done is allow businesses time to pause and think and reflect and see what the landscape looks like moving forward. But now people are going to be, asked. I think that, with employer contributions, I think, there's going to be a significant amount of redundancies. That, we've seen. I think you mentioned earlier that EasyJet have a significant number of 30% of their workforce. I think British Airways are around the same kind of volume. We're seeing affected redundancies in other sectors as well. So I think it's going to force people's arms to make those changes. I think 2008 unemployment was about 5%. I think you can easily see that going to double digits as we get into August, September. So there's going to be a significant challenge. And so I think the opportunity then to work with companies to see how they're working with their staff, whilst they're on furlough and when if they can do into a redundancy situation through their Business People Plus. I've been working with an organisation where looking at how they can engage people while they're on furlough. Significantly, if they then leave their employment, what can they do, what purpose, and how they can in their future by giving them access to training and support. I'm sure Laura will probably come on to that later, but certainly there's going to be a lot of changes. There's going to be some mergers. I think, was it Carlsberg and Marston Breweries merged? I think that was last week.
Right.
Announced over the weekend, but I think we're going to see some more mergers where people can save money on back office. I think we're going to see a lot of redundancies, and regretfully, I think we're going to see a lot of business closures. Probably accelerate the decline of the high street.
It is a shame, isn't it? Good.
Sorry, I know I kind of talked a lot. I answer your question.
No. Thanks for that, Tim. Pretty much bang on time. Thanks for your inputs. I'm going to move now on to Laura. Right, I think Laura, you might want to unmute yourself. I think you've got some slides to share yourself, haven't you? I stop sharing. Hopefully you can unmute. Can't hear you, Laura. Can you unmute yourself, or there we go.
Yeah, it said the host had muted me, so I was a bit.
No, it wasn't me.
Brilliant, thank you for inviting me onto this. I'm just going to share my slides now, so hopefully that will work. Are we there?
Yeah.
Fabulous. So I work for a company called People Plus, which is part of the Staffline Group. And just a bit of context, we specialise in helping people get back, find a job, get back into work, to progress within their career, or where they find themselves in a challenging situation, such as those who are unemployed or who are actually in prison. So we do a lot of education within prison. We operate within about 42 prisons all down the east coast of the country. We also support young carers and those with disabilities requirements, where we help them with their find personal assistance to support them with their daily tasks. And then we also do things around skills and apprenticeships and helping to develop people within their careers. And also working with unemployed. So as you can imagine, over the last few weeks, our world has kind of turned upside down a bit, whereas on this webinar a couple of months ago, I'd been saying that we had the lowest unemployment rate since the mid-70s. It's clearly significantly changed. So there's 2.1 million people who are unemployed currently, so that's grown substantially. So we've been working alongside DWP and some of the employment ministers to look at ways that we as a group can support people to get back into work. So very quickly, when Boris made his announcement, we started to look at actually how will this affect our business and how can we do something to help. So on the 23rd, and a very quick website development over about 4 days, we launched Feed the Nation. So Feed the Nation started about 2 or 3 days after Boris's announcement for lockdown. And it was on the back of a lot of concern around the availability of food supplies in supermarkets and their supply chain. And we also recognised that overnight, industries that were negatively affected by COVID would fall down considerably in the employment. And of course, we weren't aware of furlough really at that particular time. So people were really kind of clambering for jobs, thinking that theirs were going to be, there was not going to be any support for them. So with Feed the Nation, we wanted to work to something that was a purpose greater than our own. So it meant that Staffline and People Plus could work really collaboratively to redeploy and move as many people who have been negatively impacted by COVID into the increased demand roles that Gary and Tim have just talked through. So we are supporting employers over this period of time with their recruitment, but also redeployment. So we've had a couple of clients, some airline clients and some hospitality chains that have said, look, we know that our business isn't going to get back to normal until at least at the end of the year, and we want to work with our staff to redeploy them into other roles that are available, support them through that process so they're more likely to then come back into those businesses when they start to pick back up again. So effectively an outplacement type service. So we've got clients that we're talking to about both recruitment and redeployment. From a job seeker perspective, we also recognised that there was 2 key things that people wanted when they were unemployed and looking for work. Is some of them wanted to just go straight into work. They didn't want to have any further support. They just wanted to know what jobs are available and which ones could they go for. So any people that were interested in working on any jobs required to Feed the Nation, we directed and worked really collaboratively with Staffline and placed those directly into interview opportunities with the clients they saw having an increased demand. But we also recognised, and it was about 25% actually of people that applied directly for jobs with Staffline, also when offered the opportunity to upskill or to retransition their skill set from one industry to another. So we had somebody from who was cabin crew on an airline that then went to go and work in a Tesco's food distribution factory. And actually just the skill sets are so different, we had to help them just understand what was going to be the new normal. What could they expect when it was going into when they were moving into a new sector? So we built a number of chatbots to help us with the demand. So I'll talk you through some of the numbers that we've helped. So Feed the Nation was a place it's been well publicised across Sky News, all on Twitter channels, via DWP, via lots of our employers as well. And we've helped now since the end of March, both with training and directly into employment, 15,000 people to move from industries or roles that were negatively affected into the increased demand opportunities. We have had over 30,000 chatbot conversations during this period of time, and 630,000 website visits to our Feed the Nation, Staffline Group websites with people wanting support to transition to a new sector. We've reached just over 1 million on social media. So our social media Facebook pages have been really busy, and we've been advertising opportunities locally for people to understand where they could work locally and where they could train to work in those local requirements. And as I said, 25% of those applying directly for work did also want to upskill. So there's a real trend here for people to re-skill themselves, to prepare themselves for, in terms of building up their resilience for any change that may come. I'm not going to sort of talk over sort of what Tim and Gary have done, but what I wanted to share was the data and the intelligence that sat behind the approach that we were able to use to give confidence to partners, to DWP, to employers of how the trends were moving and actually the breadth and the reach of the individuals that we were helping. And you can start to see here where we had such increased demand in the logistics and food sector that Gary and Tim were talking around, and parts of the country that we were able to support at that period of time. Now, most interestingly, also things have changed, right? So Feed the Nation, although we thought was kind of coming off a bit of a cliff, and Feed the Nation, people were kind of looking for the new job employment opportunities. Then Prince Charles came out and spoke about Pick for Britain, and it all kicked off again. And we had about 18,000 people apply in a day after Prince Charles promoted Pick for Britain, because we're a close associate with them as well. So we started to look at, well, actually, what are those changes that are now happening, and how can we still provide that straight to interview, transition, or slightly longer training to help people to transition from one sector to another. And rather than just being predominantly food focused, which we were at the start of Feed the Nation, there's now a multi-skill requirement as new industries start to open back up again, as you can see with that real increase now in non-food logistics over the past week or two. You can start to see the applicants, the sort of the breadth and reach that we've got in terms of coverage of people interested in upskilling and looking for employment in new sectors. And obviously that kind of covers the kind of clients that we've been supporting during this period of time as well. So quite a national reach and quite a broad, broad view. In terms of applicants, this is sort of the trend of applicants, and I've included this in the slide because there is an absolute demand of people recognising that during this COVID period, they need to think differently. They need to open themselves up to opportunities they might not have considered before. So we've had such an increase in candidates that have said, what else can I do? What is available? What does the new normal look like? How can you help us? So we've been using our technology, our chatbots, and our social media campaigns to generate those candidates. Now, how People Plus works really well with Staffline is that People Plus is a national training provider who can help people to upskill and reskill, and we have government contracts that support us to do that. So it's been a real win-win where we've been able to help clients like Staffline, and also at organisations such as Amazon, we've been doing quite a lot of work with as well, to directly work with people who've been negatively affected, rather than having a dispersed approach of trying to find candidates. We've been able to go straight into the people who have been negatively affected and match them up with training and job vacancies. It also means that we can train people to be specifically skilled for different sorts of roles, and this actually comes out again in the new normal. So, for example, CSCS cards, SIA licenses, warehouse and distribution awareness training, employability, and customer service skill sets. This training is something that any employer can tap into and can help work with us to design a training course that would most be suitable for them when they have people wanting to come back into their business. So it's actually something that any employer can tap into and can work with us on, using the concept that I've just been illustrating that through Feed the Nation.
That'd be really interesting, Laura, too. I think a lot of the people this call might be interested in that. I know there's a few in the construction sector. You know, you mentioned CIS. That's the sort of thing that I think would be interesting. How do they get people into their industry as well? Sorry, I have cut across you a little bit. We're over time now. Were you almost there, or were you done?
Oh, good. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Oh, perfect. Great. Okay, good. Right, I need to take control of the screen again, and if you can close that down, and I'll pass us on to Belinda. Right. Share my screen. Okay. Right. Unfortunately, it's taking me back. Right. Can we all see that? Linda, are you there? Right. Karina, could you unmute Belinda if she can't unmute herself? Oh, here we go. You there, Belinda?
Yeah, got me. Sorry. Yeah, that was a technical thing there. Yeah,
no problem.
thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I've got your slides. Shall I just go on to the first one?
Yeah, no, that's
right. Okay, so we're all right for time. So yeah,
No, that's brilliant. And what I'll try and do as well as try not to do death by stats is to try and pick up on some of the things Gary, Tim, and Laura have said.
Yeah. I think I've already done death by stats.
All right, okay. I'll try to keep it brief then. I think the main thing I really wanted to look at is what is different from a contingent labour perspective when something like this crisis strikes, as opposed to perhaps if we look back to 2007 into 8 when we started to decline into a recession. So I really kind of wanted to look at the difference of what happens between when crisis strikes versus what happens in sort of a sort of more regular downturn perhaps than we've been used to before. So I just wanted to put some sort of numbers around the total sort of contingent landscape from a sort of an official sort of perspective. So we have about 4.9 to 5 million self-employed people engaged in a main job at any one time. And in addition to that, we typically have about 1.4 million sort of temporary employed bases, and that covers everything from seasonal workers through agency workers to all variants of temporary work. So we've got about 6.3 million contingent workers, and you can see there how that splits and how dependent the various different sectors are on contingent workers. So the percentages there are the level of dependency on these two forms of contingent workers by sector. And just another point to note is that of that 6.3 million, the significant minority of those are actually facilitated into work by agencies. So the rest, so just around about 1.2 according to REC estimates, are facilitated on any one given day by the agency community. The rest are actually engaged directly. So this is a large proportion, sort of circa 20% of the workforce, that is officially classed as contingent workers on a daily basis. Jared, if you can just nip on to the next one. Then just adding another cohort who are actually called permanent workers, so zero-hour contract workers, actually sit within the permanent employee cohort, and there's about another million of those. And the reason that I would categorise them as contingent is because their hours vary significantly on a day-to-day and sort of week-to-week basis. So, and again, the percentages there just showing you the extent to which something like accommodation and food relies on, for 23% of its workforce are engaged on a zero-hour contract basis. Health and social work 20%. So these are sizable proportions of a certain sector's workforce, and not an insignificant proportion overall. As I said, just short of a million there. Now, what tends to happen in a sort of more regular sort of downturn is that temporary employment tends to be the bellwether. So if you look right back to the left-hand side of the chart, you'll see that as the 2008 recession starts to take hold, the blue lines, the temporary labour, start to sort of dip into negative, and then eventually the self-employed numbers will tend to follow that. We've had a choppy road between then and now, for various reasons, including Brexit, but also changes in pieces of legislation that have impacted how people are engaged, particularly the self-employed. But if we come now to the right-hand side of the chart, you'll see that the temporary labour element has kind of been giving an indication that nothing pandemic-wise, but certainly economically, there was some very much a degree of nervousness in the market, and that temporary labour line had been sort of sitting in the negative area for a while. But what's really interesting is the last right-hand bar, or the last 2 to 3 right-hand bars, that actually sort of show that through to March, actually the decline in temporary labour has not been as sharp as perhaps we would anticipate. So what seems to be happening is that actually, rather than temporary workers being often the first to go when you're in more the traditional downturn, we've started to see the opposite happen, in the fact that contingent workers and the agility of contingent workers has become increasingly important. So just nipping on to the next slide. And if we look at what's happened to sort of various different cohorts in terms of whether that there has just been a cull of contingent workers, yes, 1 in 5 temporary workers in their broader sort of definition have lost their job, and some have lost hours and pay, and some have been furloughed. But if you actually come right through to people on the 0-hour contract, you'll actually see that nearly a quarter have actually been furloughed, and very few have actually lost their job straight away. So I know we don't normally have something like furlough in normal recessionary times, so I know this is exceptional, but I think the key point is that the engagers didn't need to furlough these workers, or if they really weren't that important to them, they really didn't have to do this. So again, this is just another pointer to the fact that actually, contingent workers are really very important within our landscape, and actually have actually been in many instances, or in as many instances as possible, because I recognise, as Gary was talking about, there are just some sectors where there isn't work for drivers and self-employed drivers, but where engagers have been able to to try and safeguard people from no work and no pay, many appear to have already done so. So again, that's sort of quite an interesting view there from the Resolution Foundation. Go on.
Sorry, I'm trying to. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. And what's also really interesting is, and again, this comes back to the need for agility, is that many of the critical services upon which we've been depending during the lockdown have actually been supported and propped up by contingent workers. So if you just take something like covering sickness absence, which has been up to 25%. Within various areas of the key worker workforce, it is the contingent workers and the agency workers in particular that have actually kept those services running. So, far from being kind of an afterthought or, necessary evil, as some, people seem to think that agencies perhaps are within the, NHS context, actually they have been propping that service up and keeping that service running, potentially up to the tune of 25% across, the NHS, and also domiciliary care services and care homes. So, first point there is that they've been, extremely important from that perspective. What they've also enabled organisations to do is scale up. So we've heard about, the need for, that agile contingent workforce to help deal with the emergency of, people getting access to food and emergency supplies in sort of different ways. So they've also helped with the scale up. And then also on the right-hand side, you'll see that beyond that, they've actually, the use of contingent workers is actually helping to do new things like home tutoring. So many supply teachers have actually been repurposed into online home tutors. The physios who can't work face-to-face are actually, many of those are self-employed. They're actually now working online and delivering therapy. And also, many freelance IT contractors are actually helping organisations to enable so many more people to actually work at home, potentially on a long-term basis, which perhaps is another subject for another day. But again, these are all contingent workers that have not just helped keep us going, but are actually helping us move on into the future. And then two elements here really. One of which is that we can see, and I've heard from others today that actually the likelihood of everybody immediately going back to full-time work isn't a given, to the extent that actually the furloughing scheme already recognises the need to ease off and enable organisations to take some of their workers back on a part-time basis. That's also being played through, as Jared mentioned earlier, in terms of a cut in not just pay, but also a cut in people's working hours. Some of which again may never come back, because if organisations work out that actually work can get done on a 4-day week basis or a 3-day week basis, they may never take people back to a 5-day week or a 45-hour week basis. So again, the move to more part-time working almost seems to be a given, for a variety of different reasons. And also, if you look at some of these roles like contract tracers and the need to scale up testing capability, many of these people are either going to be part-time workers or they're going to be contingent workers. So again, this is just another example of where the part-time stroke contingent worker is going to become increasingly important within the UK's workforce landscape.
Okay. Is there another slide? There we go.
Yeah, just one there, yeah. So again, I just sort of split this in terms of those working full-time and those working part-time. Now, at the moment, the wheel All the red through to pink is those working on a full-time, or not a full rhyme, but a full-time basis. And then the greys fading out is those working on a part-time basis. And we really do, foresee that that is going to swing far more into the grey in the short to medium term, not just the short term, than perhaps we've seen in a very long time, if ever. So again, that's just a projection there that really is going to be quite a significant swing. And then just very lastly, so that we allow some time for questions, again, just some key points there in terms of what that all means in terms of need. The need is to manage a rapidly evolving talent mix and to be able to switch it on and switch it off as it's actually required. And why would you need to switch it on and switch it off? Is because organisations for a long time are going to need to respond to both opportunities and needs. This isn't going to be a V-shaped recovery. This is going to be a really long, bumpy road. And one really last quick point, the open application process is going to be an absolute minefield. We could be looking at something between 3 to 5 million unemployed people once that furlough scheme actually is withdrawn, and those organisations that either go into administration or can't afford workers anymore, make their redundancies. You do not want to be playing in the open application process field, because you simply will not be able to manage the volumes of applications without reputational damage. So the really key thing here, which all of the colleagues have spoken about today, is the need to access readily available and pre-screened talent pools, because those are the people that you're going to need to switch on and off without just posting open vacancies. That's me done.
Brilliant. Thanks, Belinda. Yeah, thanks to you, Belinda, but to everybody who's contributed as well. Very interesting. We've got 5 minutes left to stay on time. I think we've done really well. So can I just ask, are there any questions that anybody on the chat wants to ask? There's a Q&A. You can chat and you can ask questions. If there are any, please let us know and we'll ask the relevant panel members to answer. Just give you a minute to ask those questions. Right, nothing coming through at the moment. It's either really, oh, here we go. What have we got? Okay, so it's either one or two things. We're really good, and we've answered pretty much all the questions you would have had, or you've all dropped off. But I think it's time now to wrap it up. Thanks ever so much for attending and supporting us with this. Thanks again for everybody who's attended. Tim, Laura, Belinda, Gary, thanks ever so much. Everybody on the call will get, afterwards, you'll get an email with a link to a recording of the video. And if you did want to, I think we can either share the contact details for everybody who's on the call, the panelists, or we can put you in contact with them via an email address if you wanted to ask them any further questions. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Belinda.